Shall we start? Okay, my student, today we meet with a new lecture in this semester, the second semester. Today we are going to talk or take section 3.23. If you remember, at the beginning of this chapter, we divided the English verbs according to two classification, either according to the function or according to the structure. And then we have, according to this function, we say we have primary, we have lexical, we have modal, whatever. Today we are going to classify verbs, English verbs, according to this structure. In this case, here we have verbs can be either finite or non-finite. So let's have an idea about what is meant by finite verb phrase or phrases and non-finite verb phrases. So for the verb to be, or verbs to be as finite verb phrases, there should be three conditions, three cases. The first one, there should be what we call tense distinction. What is meant by tense distinction? If we can recognize the tense of the verb, then this verb is considered as a finite. For example, the difference between, if we say, for example, she eats and she ate. Let's say her food, for example, etc. The same thing with lunch, etc. So if we can recognize that the first sentence or the first verb in the present simple tense, while the second one in the past, then we can say that the verb eat here and there, I mean the first sentence and in the second sentence, both are what are finite. This is the first condition, the first we call tense distinction. The second case, if we have what we call the concord. The concord. Some grammarians call it agreement, and sometimes, or some others, they call it concord. Concord means there is agreement between sentence elements. But in this respect today, we are going to focus on one kind of concord, that is between the subject and the verb, regardless the type of the sentence. So if there is a concord between the subject and the verb in the clause or the sentence, then this sentence is what, or this verb is, we call it finite. So for example, this concord of three levels, three cases. The first case, which is very clear in case of auxiliary verb, especially with the verb be, means whenever we change the subject, we have to change what? The verb. For example, if I say I am, so there would be, or there should be, concord between I and am. While if we change it into, for example, Samer, let's say, then we have to say Samer is, and we do not keep it what? Keep it am. And if we say, for example, the boys or the girls, in this case we have to say what? Are. So see, whenever we change the subject, we have to change the verb. This is of course in case of the present. In case of the past, we have to change it into was and were. As we said, the first case is very clear with the case verb be. The second case, which is not very clear, in case of with the lexical verb, lexical verbs. This, with lexical verbs, the concord is not very clear. Why? Because, for example, in the past, we cannot recognize this as very clear. Let's say, for example, we say George, say arrived, and if we say the family, or let's say girls, let's say, again we say arrived. See, the same thing, it is not very clear. But in case of the present, with the same verb, if we say George arrived, we say George, let's say, arrives. See, what in the girl, we say girls, what? Arrive. Arrive, without S. So then, in case of the lexical verb, in the past it is not very clear, but in the present and sometimes in the future, by using is going to or are going to, it would be very clear. The third case, which is not very clear in case of model. Let's say I'm going to write it here, model. Why? Because even if we change the subject, there is no change for the verb. Means, for example, if we say Laura, say can, and also fish as a plural, we say can. See, no change, can and can. And if I say I have to say what? Can. See, Laura and I and fish, whatever. Also with others, with other examples. If we say, for example, Martin, we say may. We don't say mays as with the lexical verb. Why? Because this is what this is model. And if I say talk about myself, I say I may. See, and if I put it in the in case of a plural, for example, we say birds. Let's say birds may. See, even whether it's singular or plural, or the difference with the case of the person, no change. So these are the cases for the verb to be finite. If the verb to be finite, there should be, the first case should be tense distinction, the second case there should be concord, and the third case there should be what we call mood. I'm going to remove this because of the space, please. So in case of what? In case of mood. So if the verb or the verbs have mood, then of course mood, we are going to discuss hopefully in more detail in the future. Mood has, for example, it has imperative, or it has subjunctive, or indicative, etc. So we take the very clear one. If we can change the verb into imperative, then the verb is finite. For example, to say stop, stop there, stop there. See, if we can form نصيغ the sentence or the verb in case of imperative, then this one is what is a finite verb. Or to say run, run away, Peter, Michael, or you. See, this, since we put it in case of imperative order command, so then these or this verb as what? As we call it finite verb. The second group, which we call non-finite, this is the non-finite. Again, it has three features. If these features achieved or in certain verbs, then in this case the verb is called non-finite. The first feature is what we call to infinitive. To infinitive. To infinitive. What is meant by this? So, for example, if I say, I want to call you. This to call, which is infinitive with to, we call it infinitive. Why? Because even if we change the subject or the verb, we do not change. Suppose we put this instead of, we say she. Say she wants to call. We don't change to call. And if we say even they or teachers want to call. So to call has no change. So the first one, to infinitive, is one of the what we call non-finite verb. The second case of the non-finite is what we call the ing participle. Means, for example, I saw him, let's say, I saw him crying. See, crying is here with, we call it ing participle. In this case, even if I change I as the subject, also as a verb, we do not change. For example, we say, mother saw her daughter crying. We do not change crying. If we say instead of, or, for example, we say, father left him crying. So if we say, for example, father left, then him. So crying the same, no change. So then the second case in which we consider the verb as a non-finite is by using what we call ing participle. The third case of the ing is what we call ed participle. Edi participle. For example, to say having been, for example, offended, say she didn't change her mind. For example, this simple sentence. Having been offended, she didn't change her mind. This is the main sentence, and this is the subordinate one. So the subordinate one, we talked about having as with ing, and we talked about be in case of the concord, and here we have the offended. Offended, even if we change the subject here or the verb here didn't change, we keep this one. For example, we say having been offended, he didn't change his mind. Or having been offended, we didn't change our mind. Change mind means change opinion and attitudes. That does not mean to change the brain. So here, this is the third case with this is ed participle because the verb is offended. So in the third case, this is in brief the way in which we have these the three cases for the finite and the three cases for the non-finite verb phrases. Okay.